The fog rolled thick across San Francisco Bay as Marcus Sullivan stood at his apartment window, watching gray clouds swallow the Golden Gate Bridge one suspension cable at a time. His left shoulder ached, the same dull throb that had ended his career 2 years ago, the souvenir from a hostage rescue in Yemen when a falling beam crushed his rotator cuff beyond surgical repair. At 43, he should have had 5 more years leading SEAL operations. Instead, he ran background checks for lawyers representing people wealthy enough to worry about their employees' secrets. Scout's cold nose pressed against his hand, the Belgian Malinois reading his mood with the precision that had kept them both alive through 3 combat deployments. The dog's amber eyes tracked Marcus's face, ears forward, body weight shifted slightly toward him. The same alert posture Scout used when Marcus's depression darkened from manageable to dangerous. They'd both retired together after that final mission. 2 operators forced into civilian life before they were ready, bound by shared trauma that civilian psychologists didn't quite understand. Marcus's phone buzzed with the day's assignment. Final visit to the Blackwell estate in Pacific Heights to review security footage for his background investigation report. The case was routine. Adrian and Sophia Blackwell, tech billionaires who'd made their fortune from a social media privacy company, wanted due diligence on their new estate manager before finalizing the hire. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Billionaires who sold privacy to millions now demanded surveillance of everyone who entered their $15 million Victorian mansion. He'd met the Blackwells 3 weeks ago during his initial visit, and something about them had triggered his tactical instinct, the same sixth sense that warned of ambushes in Afghan villages. They were too polished, too controlled, their smiles never reaching their eyes when they spoke to their staff. Wealth as armor, power as weapon. But it was Eleanor Vasquez he remembered most clearly from that first visit. 29, Filipino immigrant, live-in domestic worker who managed the entire household, cooking, cleaning, scheduling, childcare when the Blackwells traveled for business. She moved through the mansion like a ghost, efficient and silent, always positioned at the edge of rooms, never making direct eye contact with her employers. Marcus recognized the body language, someone who'd learned that visibility meant danger. Eleanor had her own companion, Hope, a small Cavalier King Charles Spaniel with liquid brown eyes and a service dog vest that identified her as trained for psychiatric support. Marcus had watched Hope work during that initial visit. When Eleanor's breathing quickened during one of Sophia Blackwell's cutting comments about her English accent, the little dog had immediately pressed against Eleanor's legs, providing deep pressure therapy that steadied her panic before it escalated. Professional, disciplined, exactly what a legitimate service animal should be. What struck Marcus, what had stayed with him through 3 weeks of document review and database searches, was how the Blackwells spoke to Elena. Casual cruelty delivered with smiles, degrading comments about her education level, her dependence on them for visa sponsorship, constant reminders that they controlled every aspect of her life. They called Hope that little rat and complained endlessly about the dog's presence, despite California law protecting service animals regardless of size or breed. Marcus had seen that dynamic before, in different contexts. Powerful people who believed their wealth made them untouchable, who treated vulnerable people as property because no one with authority ever told them otherwise. It made his jaw tight and his shoulder ache worse. Scout sensed his tension, pressing closer as they drove across the city toward Pacific Heights. The neighborhood screamed old money, perfectly maintained Victorians worth tens of millions, Teslas lining pristine streets, boutique coffee shops where lattes cost what most Americans spent on groceries. The Blackwell mansion dominated its corner lot, a three-story masterpiece of architectural restoration funded by technology profits and maintained by people the owners barely acknowledged as human. Marcus parked, checked his concealed carry permit out of habit. He was licensed as a private investigator and former military, though he rarely needed the weapon for background checks, and approached the front entrance with Scout at his left side. The dog's ears were forward, alert but not alarmed, reading the environment with senses far superior to Marcus's injured human perception. The housekeeper, not Elena, let them inside and directed Marcus to the home office where the security system recorded to a central server. Adrian Blackwell's instructions had been specific. Review footage from the past 6 months, document any concerning behavior from staff, prepare a comprehensive report. Standard wealthy client paranoia, the kind that paid Marcus's bills even as it made him feel complicit in systems designed to protect power at the expense of workers with no recourse. Marcus settled at the desk, Scout lying at his feet in the relaxed, alert position that meant working but calm. The security footage was extensive. Cameras in every common area, multiple angles, time-stamped and archived with the thoroughness that tech money could buy. Marcus began reviewing the files methodically, his SEAL training making him naturally suited to surveillance analysis, pattern recognition, behavioral assessment, threat identification. What he found made his tactical instincts scream. Months of footage showing Eleanor working 16-hour days with no breaks, the Blackwells berating her for minor issues, Sophia filming Eleanor on her phone while making mocking comments, Adrian's body language growing, increasingly aggressive when Elena didn't respond fast enough to commands. Document confiscation, footage of Sophia taking Elena's passport for safekeeping. Wage theft, conversations about housing deductions that appeared to consume Elena's entire salary. Physical intimidation, Adrian blocking doorways, standing too close, using his size to dominate spaces. And through it all, Hope providing psychiatric support that kept Eleanor functional despite systematic abuse that should have broken her months ago. The little dog was the only thing standing between Eleanor and complete psychological collapse. Marcus was making notes when he heard shouting from upstairs. Adrian Blackwell's voice, loud and sharp, then crashing sounds that triggered every protective instinct Marcus had spent 21 years honing. Scout's head came up immediately, ears swiveling toward the sound, body tensing into alert posture. Marcus moved on instinct, his SEAL training overriding civilian hesitation. Potential domestic violence situation, vulnerable person in danger, requires immediate assessment. He took the stairs quietly, Scout at his side, reading his intent, both of them operating in the tactical mode that had kept SEAL teams alive in hostile environments. The shouting grew louder as Marcus approached the second floor. Adrian's rage, Sophia's voice joining in, a third sound that made Marcus's chest tight. Elena's quiet sobbing, the sound of someone who'd learned that screaming brought worse punishment. Marcus positioned himself beside a partially open bedroom door, assessing the situation through tactical observation. Elena backed into a corner, visible bruising on her left arm, breathing rapid and shallow. Panic attack in progress. Adrian Blackwell in the center of the room, face red with disproportionate rage, screaming about a wine stain on an expensive Persian rug. Sophia standing near the window, holding her phone in recording position, smiling while she filmed Eleanor's humiliation, making comments about documenting incompetence for immigration authorities. Hope was doing exactly what she was trained to do. Positioned between Eleanor and Adrian, small body firm and steady, providing barrier support during her handler's anxiety attack. The little dog's presence was the only thing keeping Eleanor from complete psychological collapse. Professional, disciplined service animal work. What happened next violated multiple California felony statutes and triggered every protective instinct Marcus possessed. Adrian's attention fixed on Hope with vicious focus. "Your stupid dog has no business challenging me in my own house." He moved fast, grabbing Hope by her service vest collar and throwing the small dog across the room with enough force that she hit the wall before falling to the hardwood floor. Hope's yelp of pain was sharp and immediate, the sound of injury rather than fear. "This animal is aggressive," Adrian continued, his justification already forming. "I should have it put down." Sophia kept filming, her smile widening. "Eleanor, you're fired. We're reporting you to immigration for bringing a dangerous animal into our home. You'll be deported within days." Eleanor collapsed completely, sobbing, trying to crawl toward her injured service dog while the Blackwells continued their assault. Legal threats about immigration, criminal charges, promises that Eleanor would never work in this country again. The power they wielded was absolute, and they knew it. They controlled her visa, her housing, her income, and had enough wealth to make any legal threat credible. Eleanor was trapped, and they were enjoying her terror. Marcus stepped into the doorway, Scout at his side, and spoke with the calm authority of 21 years protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. "Step away from her, now." The Blackwell's shock lasted exactly 3 seconds before Adrian's face transformed into entitled rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? You're a contractor we hired. You're trespassing. We'll have you arrested and sued into bankruptcy." Marcus had heard that tone before. Wealthy people using legal threats to silence witnesses, believing their resources made them untouchable. He'd seen it in corporate executives who thought SEAL teams worked for whoever paid most. They were always surprised when operators remembered that honor mattered more than money. "I'm a witness to multiple felonies that your own phone recorded," Marcus said, his voice still calm, tactical assessment overriding emotion. "You just threw Eleanor's service dog against a wall hard enough to cause injury. That's California Penal Code 365.5, felony interference with and injury to a service animal. You're using her immigration status to threaten and coerce her. That's federal labor trafficking. I'm documenting everything. This ends now." What the Blackwells didn't know, what people like them never anticipated, was that Marcus Sullivan wasn't just a private investigator doing background checks for comfortable fees. He was a former SEAL lieutenant commander with extensive experience in hostage rescue and victim protection, trained to recognize and intervene in exactly these situations. And he wasn't leaving Eleanor to face their wealth and power alone. Scout moved to position himself between Marcus and the Blackwells, reading his handler's intent. Protective posture, potential threat assessment, ready for escalation. Hope whimpered from where she'd fallen, trying to stand on shaking legs, still focused on reaching Eleanor despite her own pain. Marcus pulled out his phone and made 3 calls in rapid succession. San Francisco Police Department, reporting domestic violence and felony animal cruelty with witness testimony. California Rural Legal Assistance, immigration advocacy organization with 24-hour hotline, and his former SEAL teammate, who now worked corporate security, who would arrive with backup and ensure no one tried to disappear evidence while authorities responded. The Blackwells' arrogance cracked as they realized Marcus wasn't bluffing, wasn't intimidated by their wealth, and wasn't going to be silenced by legal threats from lawyers who'd never faced anyone who valued justice over paychecks. Elena was still sobbing in the corner, hope now pressed against her chest despite the dog's injury, both of them shaking. Marcus knelt beside them, Scout close, speaking quietly. "You're safe. I'm not leaving. They can't hurt you anymore." The sirens were already audible in the distance, growing closer, bringing the intervention that would dismantle everything the Blackwells had built on the backs of people they believed they owned. The SFPD officers arrived within 7 minutes, their response time expedited by Marcus's specific mention of ongoing domestic violence and service animal abuse. Detective Sarah Chen took lead, a 15-year veteran with the Special Victims Unit who'd handled enough exploitation cases to recognize the pattern immediately. Wealthy employers, immigrant domestic worker, threats involving immigration status, systematic abuse disguised as employment relationship. Marcus provided his statement with tactical precision. Dates, times, specific California penal codes violated, description of the assault he'd witnessed, confirmation that Sophia's phone contained video evidence of the crime. Scout remained at his side, calm professional presence that helped stabilize the chaotic scene. Eleanor was barely functional, her panic attack having progressed to the point where she could hardly speak. Hope pressed against her chest, doing her job despite obvious pain from impact with the wall. The little dog's breathing was labored, possible rib injury, but her focus remained on her handler's psychological crisis. Detective Chen called for paramedics to assess both Eleanor and Hope, recognizing that service animals injured in the line of duty deserved the same immediate medical attention as their handlers. The Blackwells' demeanor had shifted from arrogant rage to calculated legal defense. Adrian's first call went to their attorney, a partner at one of San Francisco's most expensive law firms, specializing in protecting wealthy clients from consequences. Sophia had already deleted the video from her phone, though she didn't understand that Marcus had watched her do it, and that deleted files could be recovered by forensic analysts. What the Blackwells hadn't anticipated was that Marcus's initial investigation had given him complete access to their home security system. While Detective Chen interviewed Elena and processed the scene, Marcus quietly provided the detective with login credentials to 6 months of archived footage showing systematic abuse, wage theft discussions, document confiscation, physical intimidation, verbal harassment, and multiple incidents of Adrian and Sophia mocking Eleanor while filming her humiliation on their phones. "This isn't employment," Detective Chen said flatly, reviewing the footage on her department tablet. "This is trafficking. Federal prosecutors are going to want this case." The Blackwells' attorney arrived 40 minutes after the initial call, a silver-haired partner named Richard Westin, who'd built his career making problems disappear for clients wealthy enough to afford his $1,000 hourly rate. His strategy was immediate and predictable. Claim Eleanor had attacked Sophia, that Hope had displayed aggressive behavior toward Adrian justifying his defensive action, that Marcus had fabricated evidence because he'd been fired from the investigation for poor performance. Marcus had anticipated every defense. He'd preserved all security footage to an external drive before anyone could alter or delete it. He'd photographed the bruising on Eleanor's arm, Hope's labored breathing and careful movements indicating rib injury, and the exact position where Hope had been thrown based on impact marks on the wall. He documented Sophia's phone metadata, showing a video file deleted at 3:47 p.m., 2 minutes after police arrived. Most importantly, Marcus had called his contact at California Rural Legal Assistance before the Blackwell's attorney arrived, ensuring Eleanor had legal representation from attorneys who specialized in trafficking cases and understood that immigration status couldn't be used as leverage to silence victims. The investigation expanded rapidly once federal authorities became involved. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, specifically their Homeland Security Investigations Division that handled labor trafficking, sent Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, who'd prosecuted dozens of domestic servitude cases. She recognized the Blackwell situation as textbook trafficking, confiscation of passport and identification documents, threats of deportation to maintain control, wages consumed entirely by inflated housing and food deductions, psychological coercion, and physical abuse. They're looking at 20 years federal prison minimum, Special Agent Rodriguez told Marcus during an interview 3 days after the initial incident. California's service animal protection laws add another felony count, and the video evidence, both from their security system and Sophia's recovered phone files, makes this case airtight. But the Blackwells had resources, and wealthy defendants rarely accepted accountability without exhausting every legal option. Their defense team assembled a comprehensive strategy: hire private investigators to dig up anything compromising about Elena's background, attempt to have Marcus's testimony excluded on grounds he'd exceeded his investigative authority, claim that Elena's psychiatric disability made her an unreliable witness, and argue that Hope's service animal status was fraudulent because Cavalier King Charles Spaniels weren't legitimate working dogs. Each defense failed systematically. Elena's background revealed nothing except a young woman who'd immigrated legally, maintained valid work authorization, and followed every rule despite her employer's exploitation. Marcus's testimony stood because he'd witnessed crimes in progress and had legal authority to preserve evidence and report to authorities. Elena's psychiatric disability, far from undermining her credibility, had been exacerbated by the Blackwells' systematic abuse, making their crimes worse rather than better, and Hope's service animal certification was impeccable, issued by a California-accredited training organization and protected under both federal ADA law and California's more stringent service animal statutes. The breaking point came during a deposition 5 weeks after the initial incident, when the Blackwells' attorneys attempted to claim that Adrian had merely moved Hope rather than throwing her. Detective Chen played the video recovered from Sophia's phone, the one she deleted, but which forensic analysts had extracted from cloud backup the Blackwells didn't know existed. The footage was damning, Sophia filming while laughing, zooming in on Eleanor's terrified face, Adrian grabbing Hope by the service vest and hurling the small dog across the room with enough force that the impact sound was clearly audible. Both Blackwells making jokes about putting down the rat, while Eleanor sobbed in the corner. The video timestamp showed continuous recording for 4 minutes before Marcus intervened. meaning the Blackwells had prolonged their attack deliberately, enjoying Eleanor's suffering. Their attorney went pale reviewing the footage. There was no defense, no mitigation, no way to explain away what the video clearly showed. Two wealthy individuals torturing their employee for entertainment, using their power to crush someone with no recourse. The Blackwells accepted a plea agreement the following week. Adrian pleaded guilty to felony service animal abuse under California Penal Code 365.5, felony assault, and federal labor trafficking charges. Sophia pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit trafficking and felony animal cruelty. Combined federal and state sentences totaled 18 years for Adrian, 12 years for Sophia, with provisions that they could never employ domestic workers again upon release. The civil judgments came next. Elena's attorneys, working pro bono through California Rural Legal Assistance, filed suit for unpaid wages, emotional distress, assault, and trafficking damages. The settlement, reached after the criminal convictions made liability undeniable, totaled $4.7 million. 3 years of stolen wages calculated at proper California domestic worker rates, medical expenses for Eleanor's and Hope's treatment, housing costs for independent living, educational fund for Eleanor to complete her degree, and punitive damages that sent a message to other wealthy employers who believed they could abuse workers with impunity. Hope's veterinary expenses were substantial: cracked ribs, soft tissue damage, ongoing physical therapy to ensure full recovery. But the little dog's spirit never broke. Throughout Eleanor's depositions and court appearances, Hope performed her service animal duties with professional precision, providing the psychological support that allowed Elena to testify about her trauma without collapsing under the weight of reliving it. Marcus attended every hearing, providing expert testimony about the systematic nature of the Blackwells' abuse, the calculated way they'd used their wealth and Elena's immigration status as weapons, and the specific ways their actions violated both the letter and spirit of laws designed to protect vulnerable workers. His SEAL training gave him credibility that juries respected. This wasn't some activist making political arguments. This was a decorated combat veteran explaining how powerful people abused the weak when they thought no one was watching. The case attracted substantial media attention, though Marcus deflected interviews to Elena and her attorneys. The story had everything journalists loved: wealthy tech billionaires exposed as abusers, immigrant worker standing up to power, dramatic rescue by former Navy SEAL, even the emotional angle of Hope's injury and recovery. But Marcus understood that Elena's voice mattered more than his. She was the one who'd survived, who'd found courage to testify despite her terror, who represented thousands of domestic workers facing similar exploitation without anyone to witness their suffering. The California state legislature moved faster than anyone anticipated. Within 6 months of the Blackwell convictions, Assemblymember Linda Martinez introduced the Elena Vasquez Domestic Worker Protection Act, comprehensive legislation that fundamentally reformed how California addressed labor trafficking in private homes. The law's provisions were specific and enforceable: mandatory registration for all domestic workers employed in private residences, with registration information confidential but accessible to labor enforcement agencies; prohibition on employers holding employee immigration documents under any circumstances, with violations constituting automatic felony trafficking charges; required quarterly wage verification through California's Employment Development Department to prevent off-books payment arrangements that facilitated wage theft; and critically, establishment of a 24-hour hotline operated by trained advocates who could provide immediate intervention when domestic workers reported abuse. The legislation also strengthened California's already robust service animal protection laws. The Blackwell case had exposed gaps in enforcement. While injuring service animals was already a felony, many law enforcement agencies treated it as a low priority, and victims often lacked resources to pursue charges. The new law mandated immediate investigation of service animal abuse. Reports required law enforcement training on service animal legal protections and established a civil cause of action allowing service animal handlers to sue for damages without needing criminal convictions first. Elena testified during the legislative hearings, describing her 3 years of systematic abuse and the terror of knowing that her employer could have her deported with a single phone call. She spoke about Hope's role in keeping her functional through trauma that should have broken her, and the specific moment when Adrian threw her service dog against a wall, the moment when Eleanor truly believed she would die in that mansion because no one with power cared what wealthy people did behind closed doors. "I am alive because one person chose to see me as human," Elena told the committee, her voice stronger than it had been during the trial. Mr. Sullivan could have looked away. Most people do. But he decided that my life mattered more than his comfortable contract with wealthy clients. That decision saved me. This law will save others. The legislation passed unanimously in both the State Assembly and Senate. Rare bipartisan agreement driven by media coverage of the Blackwell case and recognition that labor trafficking in domestic settings was far more common than most Californians realized. Governor Newsom signed the Elena Vasquez Act into law at a ceremony attended by Marcus, Eleanor, Scout, and Hope, calling it a recognition that California's commitment to protecting vulnerable workers must extend into private homes where exploitation thrives in darkness. Eleanor used her settlement funds to complete her bachelor's degree in social work, graduating from San Francisco State University with honors 2 years after the Blackwell convictions. She founded a nonprofit called Hope's Haven, named for the service dog who'd protected her through her darkest period, that provided advocacy, legal assistance, and emergency housing for domestic workers experiencing abuse. The organization partnered with California Rural Legal Assistance and the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, creating rapid response protocols that allowed authorities to intervene before trafficking situations escalated to violence. Hope recovered fully from her injuries, continuing her service animal work, supporting Eleanor through the psychological aftermath of sustained trauma. The little cavalier became something of a celebrity in service dog advocacy circles, proof that legitimate psychiatric service animals came in all sizes and breeds, and that their protection under law mattered just as much as the human handlers they served. Elena and Hope began speaking at service animal training programs, demonstrating the critical difference between pets and working animals, and emphasizing that service dogs protecting trafficking victims often faced danger from the same abusers who harmed their handlers. Marcus's life changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The publicity from the Blackwell case brought him a different kind of clientele: attorneys representing domestic workers, non-profits investigating labor violations, advocacy organizations that needed investigators who valued justice over paychecks from wealthy defendants. His private investigation work became focused on trafficking cases, workplace exploitation, and situations where vulnerable people needed someone willing to document crimes that powerful people wanted hidden. He partnered with Hope's Haven as their primary investigator, using his SEAL training and security expertise to gather evidence in cases where domestic workers reported abuse but lacked proof to satisfy law enforcement. Scout became certified as a facility dog, trained to provide comfort to trauma victims during interviews, helping stabilize people enough that they could provide coherent statements about abuse they'd survived. The work paid less than corporate background checks, but Marcus slept better knowing his skills served people who actually needed protection rather than wealthy clients trying to insulate themselves from accountability. The impact of the Elena Vasquez Act became measurable within its first year of implementation. The 24-hour domestic worker hotline received over 3,000 calls, resulting in 147 criminal investigations and 89 trafficking prosecutions. The mandatory registration system identified 12,000 domestic workers in California, with labor enforcement agencies conducting random audits that revealed wage theft in 34% of cases examined. The law's prohibition on employers holding immigration documents led to 56 felony charges and recovery of identification papers for 203 workers who'd been trapped by document confiscation. Perhaps most significantly, the law created cultural shift in how California approached domestic work. The publicity surrounding the Blackwell case and the harsh penalties they'd faced sent a clear message that wealth didn't insulate employers from accountability for labor trafficking. Domestic worker advocacy organizations reported increased willingness by victims to come forward, citing both the legal protections and the example of Elena's successful prosecution as reasons they believed reporting might actually lead to justice rather than deportation. Marcus received recognition he didn't particularly want: commendations from the California Attorney General, invitation to speak at law enforcement conferences about recognizing trafficking in private residences, even a profile in San Francisco magazine titled "The SEAL Who Refused to Look Away." He declined most interview requests, uncomfortable with attention that felt like it belonged to Eleanor rather than him. But he accepted one invitation: speaking at a graduation ceremony for new service dog teams at the program that had certified Hope. Marcus stood before 60 handlers and their newly certified service dogs, talking about what he'd witnessed: a small Cavalier, King Charles Spaniel, providing barrier support to a trafficking victim, continuing her professional duties even after being injured in an assault, returning to work supporting her handler through testimony that sent wealthy abusers to prison. Service dogs protect people who society often fails to protect, Marcus told the graduating teams. They provide stability in chaos, courage in terror, and sometimes they're the only reason their handlers survive long enough for justice to arrive. What Hope did for Elena, what your dogs will do for you, matters more than most people understand. Your partnership is sacred. Honor it. Elena stood beside him at the ceremony, Hope at her feet in perfect service dog posture, wearing a new vest with embroidered words: Hope's Haven Service Dog, in service of justice. Scout sat at Marcus's left side, the two former operators no longer trapped by the trauma of forced retirement, but instead finding new purpose, protecting vulnerable people in different ways. 5 years after that first intervention in a Pacific Heights mansion, Marcus and Elena remained close friends, bound by shared recognition that sometimes justice required someone willing to confront power. They'd both transformed their trauma into purpose. Elena building an organization that protected domestic workers from the abuse she'd survived. Marcus using his SEAL training to investigate cases where vulnerable people needed witnesses who couldn't be intimidated. The Blackwells remained in prison, their appeals exhausted, their wealth unable to purchase the immunity they'd believed was their birthright. Their case became cautionary tale in legal circles, proof that labor trafficking prosecutions could succeed against wealthy defendants when evidence was properly preserved and victims received adequate legal support. But the real legacy wasn't punishment of abusers. It was the hundreds of domestic workers who came forward after Elena's example, the legislative reforms that created enforceable protections, the cultural shift that began treating exploitation in private homes as seriously as other forms of trafficking, and the recognition that service animals protecting vulnerable handlers deserved the full force of legal protection regardless of their size or their handler's citizenship status. Marcus stood at his apartment window on the anniversary of that first intervention, watching fog roll across San Francisco Bay. Scout pressed against his legs. His shoulder still ached from the injury that ended his SEAL career. But he'd learned that protecting people didn't end with military retirement. It just meant finding new battles where documentation, legal knowledge, and willingness to confront billionaires mattered more than the comfortable contracts that looked away when the wealthy committed crimes behind mansion doors. His phone buzzed with a new case referral from Hope's Haven. Domestic worker reporting abuse in Marin County. Employer threatening deportation. Possible trafficking situation requiring immediate investigation. Marcus grabbed his jacket. Scout already at the door reading his intent. Both of them ready for the work that mattered. Protecting people society too often failed to protect. Witnessing what others chose not to see, and ensuring that wealth never again meant immunity from justice.